Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 70. Wow, 70. The Stroppy Professor's Guide to the Literature Review. And yes, I have a confession to make. I hate literature reviews. I find them pedantic, I find them boring, and yes, I find them pedestrian. But I'm really fortunate because in the fields in which I work, the standalone chapter that is a literature review is incredibly rare. In my fields, we have an integrated literature review. And just so you know, of the hundreds of PhDs that I've examined, not one of them, none of them have had a standalone chapter that's titled Literature Review. Now, I'm just starting this vlog with these facts because it seems a bit startling to a lot of people. Often when I say those facts in Australia, people end up with their mouths open like... And I just want to remind people that there's lots of different ways of organising knowledge, lots of different ways of confirming originality. But often in Australia, the commitment to the self-standing literature review appears almost evangelical. So there are lots of different ways in which you can organise your research. I've already talked about the strategy that's most common in my fields, and that is the integrated literature review. So your thesis, or indeed your book, or indeed your refereed article, have a series of headings, and as part of that, integrated in with the rest of the argument and debate, is the literature review. So it's certainly not a self-standing chapter. Really matters, really interesting. So I just want to raise that because there are lots of different ways in which we can configure a PhD, lots of different ways in which we can structure our knowledge. And I think that's always been my worry with the phrase research training. The phrase research training is relatively new. 15 years ago, it was very rarely mentioned, but research training as it's currently configured so often looks like we're painting by numbers. So do this, do that, do that, do that, and you've got yourself a literature review. Well, you know what? Research by its very definition is filled with surprises. It's not predictable. If research was predictable, then we wouldn't be doing it. So I really want to talk today about the importance of enlivening your literature review and exploring really fresh relationships between form and content, and your content in context. So I'm providing 10 quick tips for you. If you do want to write that standalone chapter that is a literature review, that's great. That is your choice. Most people do in contemporary Australia. And so let me provide 10 very quick tips to ensure it's sharp, it's edgy, and the most important thing that I want for you is, and this is just offering an examiner's perspective on this, I'm trying to avoid your poor examiner reading your literature review paragraph after paragraph after paragraph and basically saying, please, 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 when will this chapter ever end? And trust me, examiners do that. So Tara's tip 1, remember that the literature review is a frame. It must have an organising principle. So literature reviews are not, obviously, the review of everything that's ever been written on a topic through time. What it must do is provide the organising principle for your PhD. And what that means is it must provide the foundation and the frame to confirm your original contribution to knowledge. That is its job. So remember, and this is the first big truth here, remember, be very clear what is included in your literature review and what is excluded in your literature review, and state that overtly on the first page of your chapter. State clearly, this is the area I'm investigating, these are the areas of literature I am not investigating, and why. And that protects you, because it means the examiner can't say, well, you didn't address these issues. You can say, I didn't address those issues, I stated that overtly in my literature review, and there are the reasons why I didn't go into those areas. Important. 2, always hold on to the purpose of a literature review in the context of your thesis or your research project. What I say to my students and anyone else that asks for advice on this topic is really clear. Before you start reading, and certainly before you start writing, I want you to sit down and write one sentence. One sentence. What are you hoping to get out of this literature review? What is the point of this literature review in the context of your thesis, in the context of your research? So what are you looking for? What are the imperatives of this literature review to enliven your PhD? I had a wonderful student I was talking with a couple of weeks ago who's doing a great PhD on health literacy. Great area, big fan of it myself, wonderful. And he realised, tragically, after spending some weeks doing his literature review, that actually he was focusing on all these other areas, and the key bit of the literature review is actually the phrase health literacy. Health literacy is defined differently around the world, and at the moment the North American definition of health literacy is tending to dominate and wash out and wipe out other definitions that actually may be better and more effective to enable research. So he suddenly realised the organising principle of his literature review needed to be conceptual around the phrase health literacy. So just make sure in one sentence you actually know what you're doing, you know what the point of this literature search actually is. 3, you had one job. No, the point of a literature review is actually one job. You have one job in the PhD, and that is you are finding a gap in the literature. Literature reviews in the rest of your research life may have different priorities and imperatives, but for a PhD, a literature review is locating a gap. And that is the gap that you'll be filling through your research. Your PhD is about finding an original contribution to knowledge. And in these vlogs, I use that phrase a lot because that's the point. That's what you're doing. If you're not finding an original contribution to knowledge, then you're not doing a PhD. So the easiest way to fail a PhD is to assume that you've made an original contribution to knowledge rather than proving that you've made an original contribution to knowledge. Remember, your examiners know the field. That's why they are examiners. So if you are stating at some point in your PhD, this is my original contribution to knowledge, and your examiners know that an article was written in 1984 that actually had already found that original contribution to knowledge, they are going to call you out on that. So the point of a PhD is to show your wares and to confirm that you know the field so well that you've been able to pinpoint the gap into which your thesis can be situated. 4, remember to be accurate and rigorous. A very important part of what we are examining in a PhD is your capacity to abide by and demonstrate academic protocols and academic literacies. So please make sure, please, that your note-taking is immaculate. Your note-taking must be rigorous and clear to enable your referencing as you come to write the PhD. Remember, your thesis is going to go through Turnitin. And Turnitin reports, I'm very interested in not necessarily software or hardware, but wetware. But the one thing that Turnitin reports do reveal very, very clearly is when the paraphrasing that you've supposedly been enacting all of a sudden becomes a direct quote. So in a Turnitin report, you can see when bad note-taking has taken place and a student has, inverted commas, paraphrased when it's actually a direct quotation. So remember, use good note-taking and ensure your academic protocols are in place, because one truth here, whenever we've got a problem with plagiarism that's revealed by Turnitin or other means, invariably it comes from the literature review chapter. Okay, 5. Big one, you are reading for interpretation and not for fact. So make sure with everything that you're reading, you ask yourself why. You're not reporting facts, you are reporting interpretation. I'll state that again. You're not reporting facts, you're reporting interpretation. So literature reviews are actually not about facts, they're about the interpretation to that fact. 6. Wow, so important. please make sure that your literature review is integrated and not fragmented. The important part of a literature review, I think probably two of the most complicated and important paragraphs that you write in a PhD are the introduction and the conclusion to a literature review, because they must guide your reader seamlessly through the debate. And it's all about smooth movements, smooth, between sections, between topics, between writers, between ideas. So many literature reviews I read are so incredibly dull because it's one damn paragraph after another. There's not a lot of relationships between those paragraphs. It's just pedantic. I feel life leaving me as I read some of these literature reviews. So please remember, integrate, integrate, integrate. 7, be prepared to go meta. Love going meta. Meta-analysis is the higher analysis, meta is above. So when you can reflect on the big picture, that is the best literature review. Too often literature reviews become this paragraph after paragraph after paragraph dealing with minutiae. But actually this is a PhD and we need to see if you can do the top order thinking. Go meta, see the big picture, engage the small scholar, engage the small article or book, but show the meta component, the bigger component that derives from that smaller point. So it is very important in a literature review that you prove to your examiner that you can manage that higher order of analysis. Don't focus on the what, focus on the why. Why was that book written? Why was that study undertaken? How were the methods? Were they effective methods? Were they really a bit dodgy methods? Were they claiming causality when really it was a correlation? So go meta as much as you can. Also is important too, think about your own historical positioning and the historical positioning of the scholars that you are deploying and the studies that you are reporting, because your positioning in time and space is different from that of your researchers that you are exploring and citing and probing. So do talk about how those contextual shifts are transforming your study. Right, 8. Oh yeah, understand the difference between a literature review and a systematic review. Now, as we all know, I hope, they're very different things. Literature reviews, systematic reviews, and we'll talk about a systematic review in 10 seconds. But what I would say, and I'm increasingly seeing, is people start out with the best will in the world to write a systematic review, and because they can't sustain it, because it has particular characteristics, they sort of end up writing a sort of pretty bad literature review that was trying to be a systematic review and ended up being neither. So please make a decision, call it, and write that. So where we see the systematic review is particularly in the health sciences, so nursing, midwifery, allied health, a little bit in paramedicine. I would like to see it a little bit more in paramedicine, but where you tend to see it is these new and emerging disciplines and paradigms show a history of very small studies that have a whole series of design flaws, if you will, and were really not representative in any form. So very small studies and a lot of them. So how exactly do we link those small studies together and what do they prove? So we have to try and find a way to manage the lack of representative studies and indeed the lack of causality. So the systematic review searches for papers systematically on a particular topic. So for example, some of the best ways in which I see a systematic review operate is two great ones I've read recently actually. The causes of breast cancer in 40-year-old women in Tasmania. Great topic to do a literature review on, a great topic to do a systematic review on. And the other one is too that I'm working with one of our great students at the moment at Flinders, the best strategies for speech therapy for students with autism in regional and remote Australia. So you can see they are very tightly constituted topics. So this means that on these very tight topics, you're able to assess the papers in that particular area and assess them by the same criteria. So you're able to evaluate them through a very prescriptive framework. So you can create a tight and effective mechanism to evaluate the value in each paper. Systematic reviews are particularly good if lots of different designs, research designs, have been used, or there just seems to be no real pattern to the research that is being instigated. Systematic reviews are great at finding patterns. Also, they resolve a conflict in the literature really effectively. So if you're working in a field where there's one big divide, so lots of studies have been done, small, unrepresentative, but they're finding completely radically different things, then a systematic review can start to work out what exactly has gone on in that field. So I do recommend them, and can I say they're often used, as I've said, in health sciences. I wish they were used particularly in early childhood research, because so many of the early years, early learning scholarship that exists at the moment are again dealing with very, very small studies. Some of the designs are pretty woolly, if I'm being kind, and I really think there might be a moment dealing with early childhood research where the systematic review might be useful. So we'll talk about that for the guys and gals out there looking at the early years and early years learning. Okay, to 9. Number 9, don't forget the value of theory. Theory is the why of knowledge. Lower order thinking focuses on the what and the how of knowledge. So theory is the key moment in the construction of knowledge. So please have a theoretical awareness as you move through your literature review. You all know how horrified I am at the idea that there is also like a theory chapter. There's a literature review chapter and there is a theory chapter. Like the rest of the thesis is not theory, that of course is fact. Well, that is empiricism, and that's a problem. So try as best you can to align epistemology, ontology and methodology. If you're doing that well and you see those relationships, you're doing fantastically. 10. Use signposts in your literature review. Big tip for punters. Literature reviews, when they are a self-standing chapter, really must be organised with great effectiveness. They must be structured well. And the sections really matter. So what I recommend when I'm talking to students about creating a good literature review in this way as a self-standing chapter, I remind them the literature review is the spine of your thesis. Like the spine of the body, it is the spine of your thesis. It is holding everything together and make sure that your project is standing upright and facing the world. So when you're writing your literature review, you might want to have a lot of headings. So put in a hell of a lot of headings on the way through because they're acting like vertebrae. So when you're just starting your literature review, put in lots and lots and lots of headings, lots and lots and lots of vertebrae. And as you start to write through the literature, find the patterns, the links, the relationships, you'll find you'll be able to remove many, nay, most of those headings, and the spine will still be upright for you. But at the start, do feel comfortable putting in lots of headings to signpost your journey through knowledge. Now, knowledge can be really boring, but really it doesn't have to be. I always say enliven your research. Enliven it by showing how much you know and your confidence and your competence with the work of others. Remember, you are proving originality here because you are fabulous. You've read the field, you know the field, you respect the field, but you are building on it. And that's why you're a fantastic PhD student. So I hope you're well. From Stroppy Tara this week, I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.